Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are ready to continue with our facility committee meeting, and the item that we are currently ready to discuss is our referendum planning process. And I don't know who's going to put that on.
I can start.
Okay.
So thank you for having this discussion. If you remember at one of the special board meetings, when we had the folks from Vogel and Epstein here, we did propose a plan to move forward with the referendum planning process without the reimbursement resolution, but yet seeking a goal of still, if the referendum passes, opening up Heritage in September of 2024. In order to do that, we talked about a partnership process and moving some of the work that traditionally would happen after a referendum process to before, so that we'd be ready to go. The presentation that night referenced moving to the facility committee the conversation on process, and that's what we're looking to do right now. Jay is going to talk us through some of the notes that he shared with me as far as the areas that we would want to move ahead with early procurement. He's got a schedule he wants to talk through, and then also potentially beginning the process of partnering with vendors. So we have a list of we put in the notes of some vendors that we could work with. And really, we wanted to get feedback from this committee on process. And just as a reminder, for the 2014 referendum, the facility committee actually sat in on interviews. So when we did the process, as an example of selecting an electrical partner for the 2014 referendum, we had interviews that took place in this room. We gave them all, I think it was like 30 to 45 minutes, and the facility committee made a recommendation to the full board as far as who to partner with. So that's another thing that we're looking for feedback on, is if you want to do that same process, we just need to line up the committee meetings to make sure that we can get all of this accomplished in a timely manner. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay and ask him to walk through the notes on the type of work that he's identified for early procurement, the schedule, and then a process of involving vendor partners. So Jay, thanks for being here.
Good morning. So Steve did a nice job of laying that out. As you look in the agenda here, there's really 6 scopes that we've identified, and I put them in priority from 1 through 6 as to the different areas of scopes. So HVAC and electrical scopes, those are critical from 2 reasons. One, from equipment long lead time procurement, there's likely going to be some items for both those scopes that we'll need to procure right after the first of the year to tie into the September of 24 turnover. There's some electrical switch gears and stuff that are out at least a year right now, generators, and similarly on the mechanical equipment. So those 2, both from an equipment standpoint, and then making sure that those subcontractors have resources dedicated to this project to be able to hit the ground running when we need to, are going to be critical. Structural steel, that's more of a supply constraint there as far as getting in the queue to get material delivered by next summer, which is when we want steel to start going up. And so we'd likely have to release that in January. But to do so, we're going to want somebody on the team to make sure we can do a parallel process with the design and with getting in line in the mill order to get that material coming. Precast panel is similar to the structural steel. The difference with the precast, though, is we may not go with precast, but we won't know that until design really kicks off after the referendum. And so I've talked with a few vendors, and I feel as though we should at least get in line with somebody, because right now one of the vendors is telling me Q4 of 2023 before you could get precast wall panels. So if you think of the intermediate school, the most recent school, the gymnasium, that's got precast panels around the entire wall. From a schedule standpoint, precast is desirable because you can set that whole gymnasium in maybe a week versus doing block and having potentially a month to 6 weeks to lay that up. But we won't know until design actually starts. It's far along if we're gonna go precast or not. So that's something I think we'll want to do, but it will be a variable where maybe we don't end up pursuing that route. And then plumbing and fire protection aren't necessarily huge constraints from an equipment standpoint, but large scopes from a resource standpoint. And as we get further on in the agenda, you'll see a lot of the same firms that participate on the HVAC trades also do plumbing and fire protection. And so if we are going to go through a competition, I thought maybe just out of the sake of time for the facility committee, if you're going to be interviewing the same types of people, do we do it now instead of do one scope now and then right after the referendum do 2 more scopes? And so there's also validity in trying to get resources lined up with for plumbing. So those are the 6 I've identified as a team, with administration and also with EUA. We've also identified some that are going to be right after the referendum, but for the sake of today, I want to just focus on the ones that we'd like to put through the process here over the next month.
I would suspect that that's a good process. It worked well last time.
Yeah.
Kind of a rough scope of what everybody's bidding. So this is probably
Yeah, so maybe move that ties really good into schedule there, Jack. So, ultimately we would issue a request for proposal, very similar to the process you went through last time, very similar to the process of onboarding us in 2019, where we get rates and fees to make sure it's a competitive process. I'm planning right now to have an RFP to be able to go out 2 weeks from today for that. I'm really close with the draft that I can review with the administration before that would go out. Give them about 2 weeks to get responses back. And then here's where I'd like your input. I initially targeted 2 Mondays. One to have us be able to review the responses with this committee. And then ideally you'd probably shortlist the group. And then potentially the next week actually hold interviews with those shortlisted. As I mentioned, there may be 2 or 3 firms that would interview for HVAC, plumbing, and electric, and potentially electrical. And so it wouldn't necessarily be 2 or 3 interviews for each scope of work. But once we shortlist, we could figure that out. And then if we needed to, we could even have interviews the following week if we want to pick a couple scopes one week and a couple of weeks. Right now, what's driving that schedule is we'd like to do a budget update right prior to the referendum. So if the referendum is successful, then the design team can really hit the ground running and we know, hey, we're still right where we need to be from a budget standpoint. And so in an ideal world, we'd have these partners on board to be able to participate in that budget update process. So that's what's driving.
what are we using for fire protection? That our fire system. I do not remember right now. Because that's one of the things I think we were talking about in the last referendum. Standardize, all this equipment. And suppose as you put your specs together, you can say, hey, this is what we want. I'm assuming everybody can get it. I don't know if it's distributors.
On the fire protection side, it's fairly straightforward. Once you get into some of the proprietary stuff on like the control system, some of the fire alarm stuff, but fire protection, actual sprinkler scope is fairly. You know who does the it's not the same vendor to all the buildings.
We do now. I don't know who put the fire sprinkler system in the intermediate.
These were just, this isn't an all-inclusive list. I just want to give you a feel for who some of the potential subcontractors and suppliers could be. I'd obviously reach out to them ahead of the RFP going out just to gauge interest to make sure we had a list, but based on the scope and type of the work, I'm fairly confident we'll get a really strong response.
So we're just looking for feedback on this topic, looking at those categories, kind of the timing, and then the involvement of this committee, and whether you're comfortable really with what Jay has presented, or if there's anything you'd like to see us do differently.
No, I think the process worked well last time. I like what you presented.
A few things we did last time also was we looked at local vendors.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to see kind of what your feedback is on that. I mean, like structural steel is a good example with vendors. We work directly with them on kind of the structural steel costs. And this is kind of a process where you put it out to RFP and you kind of go through that whole piece. So we can do it either way. But I remember last time we did have a large discussion about some of our local vendors and how we wanted to kind of try and work competitively with them.
I would review that process that you used for vendors last time, so that get a competitive.
Say that again, Jack. You'd rather, you want
I
us to
would-
go, you would not go this process with them?
No, I would go this process, but what I would do is review what we did last time,
All right,
so that we follow the same process.
sounds good.
Because I think we went directly to vendors last time. And there was a process that we followed so that we knew we were getting a competitive price. So I would review that process.
And to your point, Randy, too, from HVAC, electrical, and plumbing, fire protection, there isn't any trades large enough necessarily that we call Waunakee home, but each of those organizations has key employees from the district too. So
That was just a big, large conversation as we've gone through this over the last decade, trying to see how we're gonna look at some of our vendors and also how we look at some of the supporting programs. So
And just to be clear too, structural steel, that's just the supply of it. The actual installation or erection of that would follow the referendum. You got a neighbor here
that's right.
that does that type of work too, so,
Right,
but
exactly.
this is just supply, just so that's clear.
Got it. Thank you.
So the committee's comfortable with this process. At the September board meeting, we would seek to add the meetings that are outlined on this calendar.
All right.
So one question I would have, Steve, for the group, does the group want to be part of that shortlisting, or do you want us to work with the administration to shortlist and then you guys just take part of the interview process on the 10th?
Just saying.
I'm all right with just the.
So just to point out, the 10/10 is a school board meeting. Night. So
It is.
so
It would be that week.
You do it.
Maybe.
That's what you're looking at, is that week or that day?
It could be any time that week. And
Anytime that
I didn't
week,
know
okay.
if this, like
Yeah.
Monday mornings, if you've been trying to do facility committee meetings.
Sure.
So that's why I used Monday, but it could be any time that week.
We could actually do it during the day if you guys.
And ideally, we probably bring that to the October board meeting if we really want to keep to the schedule. I assume your thought was not waiting until the November board meeting to
So,
actually select the partners. So we
Right.
probably would want to line that up.
well, now that you say that, Steve, I wonder if we don't target the week of the 3rd for the interviews. If the facility committee doesn't want to be part of the shortlisting, which I don't think you need to be, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, then maybe we do the interviews a week prior to the 10/10 board meeting. If that gives us enough time, if they're due back the 23rd, within a couple of days, we can put an analysis together to do that shortlisting, let people know. So then, in the September board meeting, you would pick the date that those interviews would happen. So I'll just put the week of 10th.
Sounds
great.
Does
Thank
anybody have any other questions or feedback for Jay?
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Jack.
We'll review the capital maintenance projects.
Okay, so different topics. So this topic is related, not related to the referendum at all. So I'm going to ask Rebecca just to first bring up the treasurer's report, which is the first attachment, to just share, kind of the scope of where we're at with our maintenance funds that are available for the district. So we recently completed our audit of the 21-22 fiscal year. And what we're looking at is the the capital projects funds out in the middle of the screen. And what I want to talk about for just a minute is what the board's plan was related to maintenance projects and expenditures, so you can see where we're at. The board passed a policy change last summer that is moving our maintenance funding from Fund 40, which is the capital projects fund, to Fund 10, which is the district's general fund. That was done because of a bond rating change for our district. And so the decision that was made at that time was to draw down or use the funds that are in our capital projects budget over a couple of years and then begin to fund maintenance projects out of Fund 10. So in the previous meeting, the budget committee meeting that took place at 7:30, the budget committee asked that the end of the year balance report for Fund 10 identifies a $300,000 placeholder for capital projects as we are beginning the process of moving that over to Fund 10. So you will see that at the September board meeting that we're breaking out $300,000 within Fund 10. But just know that the capital projects funds in Fund 40 are intended to be spent down as we transition our change from Fund 40 to Fund 10. We have a remaining balance in Fund 41 of $807,000 as of July 1st. This committee has already approved projects out of the 22-23 school year that will draw down a good dollar amount of the 807. But we're going to pull up the capital projects report for this year. But I just want you to keep in mind that there is still a balance in there between the 500-ish thousand that's been approved so far and the 807 that remains in this fund. If the board had a goal of closing that out in the 22-23 fiscal year, that would mean we could expand the scope of some of our maintenance projects this year to complete that process of closing out our Fund 41. So we're gonna, in just a minute, pull up and show you where we're at right now with the capital projects. And we've got a few new ones that we want to talk to you about as part of this agenda item. A couple things to put on your radar that are projects that we could move ahead with. But a lot of it really depends on, as a board, is your goal to close that out and transition to Fund 10, because we would be able to do that this next fiscal year and really then complete that process of moving from Fund 40 to Fund 10. So Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind going back to the agenda, and if you could pull up the capital projects update for a moment. If you want to go back for just one moment, Rebecca, is this the new list? I can't quite tell. No, that's not the new list. That's fine. Sorry. That's the right one. Couldn't see it. So this is in your packet. This is an update on the projects that have already been approved by the committee and are in various stages of being completed. I just wanted John to have an opportunity to share any information with you regarding what's already been approved and where we're at with the capital projects that he's currently working on. John, you really want to share?
Yeah, not really. Things are going as planned here. We have the library at Prairie was a big project that's been completed. Carpets have been completed at various buildings. Having a boiler at Prairie replaced. Have no school coming up. But otherwise, things are going great with this process so far.
So this is what's already been approved. moved. And then I wanted to, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind, pull up the list of additional items. And we put this together again because I'm aware of the interest in moving from one fund to another, which would require us to expend the remaining funds on maintenance projects that are in Fund 41. This is a list that John's been working on of potential additional projects. Obviously, some of them are too large to be funded out of what's remaining and are going to be moved over as we begin the process. If the referendum were to pass, you all know that there is approximately $7 million set aside within the capital question for our maintenance list across the district. So obviously there's things on here that could not be funded out of Fund 40 and would need to move over to beginning the process to work with this committee on the $7 million. But there are things on this list that we could move ahead with for this school year. Rebecca, would you mind going back to the notes for a minute? There's a couple of items that we have some folks here who are going to speak to them that definitely know more about this than I do. One of them is a science classroom project at the middle school, and I know Tim's here. Tim, would you mind popping up to just talk a little bit about the concept of the middle school project? We did include information from Tim and Jeff at the middle school in the packet, but I thought it'd be helpful if Tim could just give you a high-level summary.
So you have two items in your packet to kind of provide a little more detail on this. The first is the memo from Jeff Keenis, and another one just so you can kind of visualize what we're proposing here is the attachment with the remodel examples. So as we've experienced enrollment growth at the middle school, we've had to create some additional sections, create some additional staff, and we have outgrown what we've had in terms of cabinetry, prepared science classrooms that were completed in the 2006 project. So one thing that occurred, I think 2 years ago at the middle school, was we completed these upgrades to room 223. And the room that we're talking about here is on the opposite side of this wall. So the wall we want to upgrade, the wall we want to upgrade in 221 is on the other side of this wall. But what you see here is we're looking at installing cabinetry with a more durable countertop. We put in a floor, a rubberized floor runner at the base, and that's what occurs at the wall. And in looking at what's in your additional projects list that was just up, and looking at the memo from the middle school, the cost estimate is including the runner, which you can see right here, the cabinetry and the plumbing. Now, the good news is a lot of the piping has already been run to this wall because of this prior project for 223. So the plumbing cost is reduced. One thing I did notice that the middle school would like to see happen that is not in the original proposal and is not reflected in the cost is when they did 223, they also installed a set of ceiling mounted retractable extension cords. So there is an electrical cost with this. I don't know what the number might be on that. We probably want to reach out to our partners and get a number on that. But I think the final cost, if we did the ceiling electrical too, would be certainly higher than what you see in your materials, but that would make it exactly comparable to what we did in the earlier group. What you see in the list and in the original middle school memo would be for the floor runner, the cabinetry, and the plumbing.
So as Tim identified, we want to go back and ask John to get us a quote on the electrical so you can see the total scope of it. But Tim, what kind of timing were we talking about? Obviously, given the school year was started, can you remind me?
Well,
that?
given what it was, I mean, I think the original conversation we had is, was this something that we could actually get done in that fall break at the end of October? And I think since, we're sitting here at the very end of August, being, mindful of labor and supply chain issues, and also, quite frankly, it's not the biggest project, it's not the smallest project either. The 2 days, I think, is optimistic. I mean, I think, John, you were thinking it's a 1 week minimum, so you're looking at like a winter break or a spring break.
Yeah, 2 days.
So we're looking at one of the breaks.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say, just circling back to the electrical is important. So if you're doing a science experiment that, requires some heating, we don't have gas in any of our, in this classroom. Would be cost prohibitive to try to run that. So the concept of the retractable ceiling cords is you have hot plates. So when you have a science experiment where you need to add energy through heat, you're doing it electrically. So that's the why of all of the ceiling mounted cords.
So any of these additions that would happen in the middle school, it's reasonable to assume in the middle school and the middle school that much longer, but
Mhm.
the life of this makes sense going forward, no matter what.
There'd be a lot of things you could use this room for. I mean, a full-blown high school science lab would obviously want something more. But there's a variety of STEM-related uses where you'd want some water access, some additional storage, some heat, potentially art, potentially other areas where you could certainly make use of this.
I would see this is gonna be applicable moving forward.
If we didn't think it, if we didn't think it had some long-term utility, we would find ways to shuffle around for a few more years. But we think we can use this for the long run, so we're proposing it.
So the committee is going to be meeting again, obviously for the referendum planning process. We can bring this back with the electrical cost as well, so you can see the complete picture, so we'll give John some time. I just wanted to put this on your radar under two things. First of all, just realizing that if we do have a goal of making that transition from Fund 41 to Fund 10, we do have some additional resources available. And then number two, this would benefit, the middle school this year if we're able to get this going. We can put this back on the agenda for the next meeting as well, once we have all of the scope of the costs. If that makes sense.
Do you know when the next meeting might be?
We are gonna schedule that the week of October 3rd.
I guess, my question, John, is kind of what you're saying with projects. If we were to do something for the winter break, when would we want to put things in motion?
It's really about availability, like Jay was saying too. We should schedule the project as soon as we can. That's what we're gonna do. So get the items in, and the countertop, for example, with Jay Farnsworth room at the middle school that we did, that was.
Which is the one that's the finished room in the examples.
The science countertop is a long lead time usually because of the epoxy in that material. So sooner the better.
It seems to me waiting isn't going to, for me, add a lot of new content. I mean, if you feel, if we have a team that doesn't have equitable space, I'm concerned about that. I think you need equitable space. And if you have a new team that's formed that is, in a facility that can't do the same projects and labs that the rest of the teams can do, I think you begin scheduling it and get it done.
The
Would
other
be my
option is to
view.
conceptually approve it. We bring forth, we can see if we can get the cost to the electrical by Monday, and we bring that forward before. So
Yeah. I mean, I just think we should do this as quickly as we can to get it scheduled. because they'll still only be there for probably half the year.
Do you think you could get that? Okay. So we can do that too.
That's my feeling.
I guess the other thing that you take a look at though is that you got a bubble class going through. After that, the student population standpoint. Next 2 years are about
Probably won't remove sections, it'll probably remove class size. That won't-
It's not as big of a bubble now as it was a few years ago.
Yeah,
I mean, relative. The bubble is, the class is the class, but we're starting to see some buildup in the intermediate school. I don't know how, if they've seen the last five classes.
I don't see it as where it's gonna remove sections, Jack. I think it would be a piece where you might see fluctuations in size of the classes. Individual, but I don't see it as a staffing.
In talking with Jeff, I mean, that was a question I did ask Jeff. I said, given kind of what you're seeing for enrollments in the grades leading into the middle school, given that when we talked about it, we were looking at kind of a winter break timeline, I said, is this, because what we'll do up to that point in time is, so the teacher's in the unrenovated classroom now. When she's taking kids out for a science lab, she's negotiating space with, so it's not that the kids won't get the same activities, but we are going to have to kind of swap classrooms, and class is going to have to meet in different rooms than they normally would the days of those projects. And I said, well, if it's just for really January through June of this year, because we're looking at a winter break timeline, we would, if that's what it is, we'll do the shuffle for the rest of the year. But Jeff's thinking is, as long as it is still a middle school, we are going to need and make use of this kind of space. And we feel it has long-term use beyond it. But we anticipate we'll be using the space in this manner for the remainder of the time we will be in the middle school, which if, I mean, we would be talking spring of the 22-23, we'd be talking the 23-24, the 24-25, and the 25-26. And that's providing the referendum passes, which we certainly hope it will. So that's kind of the conversation I had with Jeff a month ago.
I guess as a, just a side note, have you guys started looking at what the heck you guys are going to do with that building? Once this, has there been any conceptual discussions?
Yeah, I mean, Tim's been taking the staff on some of the tours of different school districts that have two campus model. I think part of the piece, Jack, is also to be looking at kind of your 5 years out. And I realize there's a desire to know exactly what that's going to be utilized for. But I think there has to be a conceptual planning piece as far as how they're going to most strategically use it. And you have ideas of like a freshman campus. Is that a good idea or not? There's pros and cons to that. At a minimum, you're looking at moving departments or some of those pieces over there. And so, I think try and put down like a concrete plan that says this is what it's going to be used for in 5 years. I can't commit that in 5 years. That's going to be kind of what it's going to look like. I think there's pieces right now we're looking at family consumer ed. We're pushing classes from the high school over to the middle school this fall, I believe, just in order to operate more sections of family consumer ed. So those are kind of areas that I see kind of developing. Pieces like your tech ed, your innovation areas, those are places that you probably would have maybe dual spaces. You have also maybe a departmental level that goes over there. So
Okay.
I don't see this as waste of space or waste of dollars spent in any way.
Yeah, and I would actually extend that a little further. So we did have a team from the high school in the early spring spend a few hours in the middle school walking through some spaces. If you, and we don't have it here and it's really not on the agenda, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but the upcoming referendum has some specific things we're hoping to do at the high school. And I suppose if we ended up with a very favorable outcome on costs and we're able to access contingency that was left over, there are more things you could do, but the proposal we have that you approved the other night is really not looking at making any investments to the middle school building. So, you know, long-term, to fully utilize that site as part of a 2-building campus is going to take more study because we're going to want to make more. I mean, this is actually a very cost-effective way to add longer-term flexibility because we don't have a lot of investments in the middle school facility at all in the base referendum project. We'd have to get a lot of good luck going in contingency.
So what do you need from us?
Just looking to see if the committee's willing to move that forward to the September board meeting, and we can add the electrical information so you can see the whole scope of it. And then ultimately be funded out of the Fund 41 capital projects budget.
Let's do it.
Okay, and then there's one other topic we wanted
You want to
to.
motion on that, Steve, so we can kind of formalize
Sure,
that
that's fine.
recommendation, that would be great. So if you had.
Mo-
Ted and Jack.
Motion to approve moving forward with the middle school science plan.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item that I wanted to get on your agenda for knowing what the issues are is the high school track. So we do have Jen here. Would you mind coming up? And then Aaron, I know he's at a dentist office, I think, with one of his kids. So he's going to be joining us via Zoom. So thank you, Aaron, for doing that. We do have a report we included in the packet, but I don't know if Aaron or Jen wants to jump in first to just kind of provide a high level of the issues associated with the track. Do you have a preference one way or another, Aaron? I'm not sure if you're somewhere where you can talk or not.
Well, yeah, I'm out in the lobby area. I don't know if you can see me or hear me right now. But based on the probably efficiency of the meeting, maybe Jen can start it off.
Okay.
So I called Fisher Tracks to come out and look at our track. It was repaired-ish with the big crack down the backstretch on Main 1, which is I think another issue. If you go see that repair, there's no inside line in sections since they repaired, and there's bubbles and pieces of the track coming up from the repair already. But that's one other thing. We did order all new hurdles. Is kind of what set this off. We got nice new hurdles. The base, check the base measurements and everything. Should theoretically fit. The bases do fit, but because of the top, the top board, which is it's customized and nice, so I don't want to cut them like we cut our old hurdles to fit. Does not fit because our lanes are not equal. When the track was redone, when the turf in the stadium was redone, we had to use the spray-on material instead of polyurethane, which lasts a lot longer. And the base is quite old and uneven. Some of you were there when we met with the company and asked for polyurethane. The machine that they use that drives around and sprays it nice and evenly around, and it lasts twice as long as the material we use. It wouldn't work because some spots would be this thin, other spots would be that thick when they used it, kind of thing. So there's parts of the track coming up.
I can add a little history, Jen. When we did Warrior Stadium, we took a look at what we were going to do to replace the track. At that point, we kept the decision from our consultants and our engineer was to keep the base and just to resurface it. It was really what we ended up doing. There were some issues with the resurfacing pieces, as Jen shared. There were some things blind, which we tried to work through, but there's limited ability to kind of shift those once they're kind of in place. But I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is there's been some areas that haven't been runnable, is that a word? As far as being able to operate for the needs that we have for our track season. There's been some areas that have been kind of either settling or buckling or bubbling. There's been some issues that we've been doing And I know Aaron, you've been involved with trying to kind of get some of those corrections to it. So I think that's what's kind of precipitated kind of bringing this here, is that there just are some continual issues as far as with, needing to kind of address the track as a whole. And it seems right now it's kind of an annual discussion that we're having.
So if you read the letter, what are you asking us for? There's no dollar. Is this just a planning, or is this?
Yes. Steve, John, Aaron, I guess I'd ask you to kind of weigh in on kind of where that dialogue.
Well, say this is a conversation, Jen and I have had. The issue we have right now, one of the issues that we have right now, we've talked about, but right now the latex is starting to become delaminated from that sub base. So we're going to continue to have these bubbling and these other issues. But with the 8 lanes aren't the same width. And they're not, and even lanes 1 through 7 that are basically the same width aren't the legal width any longer. There's an argument that our track isn't a legal track, potentially. And so we definitely do need to consider really a more complete renovation. I don't know that there's any more, patchwork we can do going forward. I know we talked with Fisher Track and Darren Olson, the guy who wrote the report, and he said ballpark figure of 400,000 to 500,000 to do a full renovation. That would include the sub base and the asphalt, which Jen and I had a discussion. She believes that asphalt hasn't been touched since it's been laid. And if you look in their report, they figured that should last about 18 to 20 years. And we were thinking it's been in there closer to 30. So we definitely need to have some kind of plan to address this moving forward. And that's what we're hoping the facility committee can help us, give us some direction and help us develop a plan going forward, so we can have eventually have a solution.
So Randy, is this something that can be handled in the referendum?
Certainly, absolutely.
So I guess, there's no actionable item here.
No.
And I think one of the things before we do that is we need some actionable,
That's right.
what's it going to cost so that we can, at least make decisions on this.
I think it was brought to date just as an informational item. What's an issue for us?
Yeah.
And it's one.
Well, it's been
discussion
an
cost.
issue.
Yeah.
Since we put it down.
Right.
So,
Okay.
we should have had it corrected back then. But anyways, it's great that they bring it forward. And I guess I would submit that they bring some type of proposal on what to do, lay it into the referendum and, move forward. Is there anything else you need from us?
Where are we at right now, Aaron and Jen, as far as runnability for this school year? I mean, right now, I know that you're having some folks that are, last spring, there were some things that we had to address in order to make it runnable on some of those corners. I think as the frost came out, some things kind of evened out, and then we had some other pieces done. I wasn't fully involved in all that, but I think there was some work happening. Where are we at for spring, Aaron? And obviously, this isn't something we can just do right now and have it ready to roll for the track season. But what do we need to do to make sure that, particularly Jen's got something that we can make sure is functioning here as we move forward into the spring season?
Well, we're going to have to get those we have to get someone, whether it's AFS or Fisher, out here to repaint those lines that they covered up when they patched. We're also going to have to wait and see what this coming spring's frost does to the track, and what kind of heaving, freezing, and thawing we get from that. In terms of runnability, I mean, we can practice on it, but we can't host any type of meet that would, I'll call it, say, count in terms of like a conference or like a regional or a sectional meet at this point, because like I said, our track isn't the correct widths and things like that. So when Jen, you can maybe fill in from there too.
Any big meet would be a problem because we figured out how to fit with using some of the old hurdles. We can probably get six hurdles across if we intermix. We can't do the full 8 even with the old hurdles.
So,
I met with all my coaches out there to try to figure it out.
so when would you plan on doing a major?
Right. How much?
That's, yeah, I mean, they were
Conference
trying to
week,
get us
you
to host a sectional or regional or something, but obviously we wouldn't even get approved.
But
So,
you can run like any of your other meets on there?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we might need to dial back the freshman sophomore invite, so we're not going until midnight, but I mean, it's not going super late with 10 teams. It depends. So, I mean, I think we can host what's on the schedule right now for next season, if we get an inside lane. We don't have the inside lane coming off for the first curve.
So maybe the first thing is to look at the lanes. Now we
Or
can
the
take a
inside
look
line.
at kind of what that piece looks like referendum wise, get us through the next track season. And then that can be a target.
So what's the time frame to redo the track? I mean, when do we have to decide so that, how long does that take?
The summer, I would assume.
That would need to be a summer project. That would be something you would more than likely start in like a June to have it ready to go and be done before the fall sports. Our case football has to start using that stadium. So
And to get in that lineup,
Well, I don't think we can do anything this year.
No.
You gotta paint that line. I think what you do is you bring something actionable back to us so that we can make decisions. Is there any other discussion we need on this?
More of an FYI today, to let you know what's happening.
Do you need any other approvals on? anything?
So, John, is there anything else? Not in regards to this, that I'm aware of.
How do we get that online painted for this next?
Whether
Company
I'm
on that?
getting where we want.
We'll get it done.
I just.
No, thank you.
all right. Any other items on this list that you want to talk about?
Haven't heard anything else that you wanted? Which list? I have a lot of lists.
The maintenance list that said
The
that.
maintenance list, the additional projects, have we done everything you need from us?
There, you guys have seen them, the attachments and the additional projects. There's a ton of stuff in there. Even redoing the track is in here without cost. There's no
Right.
Cost on it yet.
Is that
Tons of
just-
stuff in here.
Is that just an informational item for the committee today? All right, thank you. That's all we do.
Thanks.
So anything else? If not, we can adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.